My name is Remi Holden. I'm an assistant professor of information and learning technologies at the University of Colorado in Denver. And I want to begin today by thanking the Hypothes team for inviting me out here and supporting the work I'm going to present today. I also want to note that if you'd like to learn more about my teaching or my research, my website, RemiHolden.com, is right there. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Remi Holden. A few minutes ago, before the panel began, I tweeted out these slides on our conference hashtag if you'd like to access the presentation at any point in time. Now, I want to begin by saying that when Jeremy asked me to participate today, he said, Remi, you should kind of embody the perspective of the educator. And I began to think about how I might begin to do that, and I thought the best place would be to start here. This is what I was doing a decade ago. I was hanging out in the South Bronx. I was a middle school mathematics teacher, and I was running around with a bunch of amazing young kids doing mathematics and really thinking about, what does it mean to teach and what does it mean to learn? And ultimately, I've come a long way since then, and the question is, where am I today? Well, in the intervening years, I spent 5 years instructing for the University of Michigan. There's some Michigan love in the house, that's great. When I was at Michigan, I taught 13 unique education courses. Not, the same course 13 times, but 13 different courses, many of which were online, variety of platforms and tools. I did my PhD at the University of Wisconsin. There I taught 3 unique courses, mostly face-to-face, but with a lot of online kind of complementary tools and resources. And again, now I'm at the University of Colorado in Denver, and in the last year and a half, I've taught 6 different courses, again, mostly in this case online. So I've got a lot of experience with online education, tinkering with tools, playing around with my pedagogy. I'm going to try and bring some of that to the fore today. And in doing so, this is essentially my area of expertise. I study games and play, learning theory, design and design-based research. I'm essentially a teacher-educator who likes to mess around with digital media and think a lot about pedagogy. And it's in this context that I'll show you the only table in my presentation today. This is the only table. So for the linear thinkers out there, get your fix. So I'm going to present about a course I taught last semester, in the spring semester. It was a games and learning course. It was like a seminar, 12 students, entirely online, and I was primarily using Hypothesis for discussion, essentially annotation as discussion. This summer, I'll be teaching a digital storytelling course with the movement DS106, if that rings a bell for anyone. I'll have about 40 students. It'll be entirely online, and I'm thinking a lot about annotation as essentially multimodal creativity. And this coming fall, I'll have about 80 students in 2 seminars, 2 sections really, of a Learners in Learning Theory course. It's going to be blended face-to-face and online, and I'm thinking about annotation really in that case around notions of peer review and peer-to-peer collaboration. But what did I do this past 6 months? I had a games and learning course, and you can dig into the course right now. We were working publicly in the open at gamesandlearning.wordpress.com, and all course activity on Twitter followed the hashtag ILT5320, the number of our course. You can access all of our course readings. You can access the entire course calendar. There are a variety of blogs. You can look at all of the annotations with Hypothesis that I made and that my students made through gamesandlearning.wordpress.com. So, to review, this course was about games. It was entirely online. There were 12 students, small class, and it was a very constructivist approach. We were creating knowledge, essentially taking various blocks of information and creating some kind of new castle of knowing. I want to talk about planning first, kind of core aspects of my work as an educator and how I approach the use of annotation in my planning of the course. So in my school of education, we have a learning management system, Canvas. Folks are probably familiar with that to a degree. We've also been really encouraging blogging recently, and a lot of our graduate students in particular are using blogs as essentially online base camps, ways of having a professional and public persona. We're also, of course, shifting a lot of our networking to Twitter, and I saw Hypothesis and annotation fitting nicely within this ecology of tools. And in my planning, I thought of how Hypothesis could help to seed reflection and writing through blogs that then would be shared out publicly via Twitter. And similarly, that then conversations on Twitter and that networking would inform subsequent writing, and then how to closely read texts. This was essentially a way of knitting together a repertoire of tools for learning across online settings. And that was my general approach to course planning. The second thing I want to talk about then is my approach to teaching, my pedagogy, and emphasize essentially a pedagogy for annotation. How did I approach this practice as a teacher? Well, 4 things that I was thinking about in terms of my teaching practice. First, I wanted students to annotate readings with their thoughts, their questions, highlights, as we've heard, their confusions, and also related resources. Secondly, I wanted them to present annotations that were both insightful but also informal, and that invited others to contribute and respond. Third, I wanted students to ask follow-up questions during the kind of back and forth of what would ideally become annotation as discussion. And that lastly, they could use annotation as a way to challenge peer argumentation, to address blind spots in logic or perspective, to even confront bias, and to check, and ideally to even work against aspects of privilege through their conversations. So where did this then begin to take place? Well, we did this through, of course, course text, and here's a very famous course text by Ian Bogost, the well-known games researcher and, theorist. We did that through student blogging, and all of the students were blogging and then annotating each other's blogs, and we were going back and forth in that media and forum. And we were also doing more informal learning, like annotation flash mobs, where we would jump into an online resource, invite anyone, and then play around in the margins. And through all of that, we began to position the margins essentially as meeting places that were connecting formal with informal learning. The third thing I'll mention then is learning. What about my students? Again, there were only 12. It is a small sample size, but what did they think about this work? Again, I'd like to focus on 3 of those students briefly. These are all pseudonyms, but this was public blogging. You can track down what I'm about to show you. Let's call them Adrian, Carly, and Jordan. And so one focus from Adrian was that the discussion with discourse mates, as Adrian called them, and everyone else pushed me to examine issues more deeply. I credit this to the aforementioned discourse mates and hypothesis. He goes on to conclude, I have never been in a graduate course where the discussions were so contextually relevant and on point. How about Carly? Carly notes, however, that there were times, and we discussed Gamergate, this was a games and learning course, where she said, open annotation made people cautious about having a real discussion with their classmates. And she actually noted it's not as safe an environment to talk about more sensitive issues as it might be if we were in a more closed environment. And I think it's really important to promote this perspective, given yesterday's panel on abuse and the kind of tensions around working in the open with students. I'll lastly mention Jordan's perspective that annotation with hypothesis was one of the greatest challenges and rewards, and it allowed things like highlighting the text freely. However, Jordan noted this was more engaging than perhaps a Canvas discussion, again an LMS-based, but the open quality was somewhat less mentally freeing of self-doubt. There was a sense of wanting to look smart to peers. Ultimately, though, Jordan concludes that it changed the way I imagined theory, literature, and peer interaction as it comes together. So pros and cons to thinking about annotation, particularly in the open. Accordingly, as a teacher, I want to encourage annotation as formative, social, almost improvisational expression, and actually not as something that I want to see as a summative evaluation. There's plenty of other work that I can grade as an instructor. I did not need to grade their annotations. Lastly, I want to mention reflection. The fact that I was doing a lot of my own annotation with hypothesis on my students' work and elsewhere. That was seeding my own blogging, again, which you can visit on the Games and Learning website. That was then seeding Twitter conversations with a variety of folks about that work. And that was ultimately then feeding back into annotations on my blog, and ultimately some very interesting playfulness that was occurring over the course of 6 months. Now, this is a really small data set here, but for me as an educator, I find this interesting. This is just page views and unique visitors to a class course blog in a single month. Keep in mind there were 12 students in this class. We had over 350 unique visitors in the month of April alone. So we were getting the word out there and engaging a broader audience, which for me, honestly, as an academic who has to publish research to get tenure, more people are reading my blog than are reading my research. And I think that's a really important thing to point out. So this helps me then to embrace open as a commitment to making teaching practices both participatory and public. So I'll begin to conclude here by noting that all of this thinking around knitting different tools together, honoring student voice, and thinking about a pedagogy of participation has led to a project that we're calling Playful Annotation with Hypothesis, Studying Interactive Text, or POSIT. And the project's website is posit.com, where the slides for this presentation are hosted. And this project is actually a collaboration with Hypothesis. Again, thank you so much to folks like John and to Dan and certainly to Jeremy. It's actually funded through the National Science Foundation. I am a Data Consortium Fellow, and we're looking at the relationship of learning analytics and play. And we're asking questions like, under what conditions is the collaborative and networked practice of open annotation playful? And also, what does hypothesis activity, both individual and collective, reveal about the playful qualities of open web annotation? And we'll begin to advance that work as I continue to teach and work with other colleagues around hypothesis use. I'll leave it there, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you all so much.